What's up, my boy? I hope you did pretty good on your tests. We're back to chapter 13. That last chapter was pretty crazy, huh? It had been 2 days on the run, cutting back and forth to leave false trails. No food, no sleep, only drinking when he waded down the mountain streams, trying to kill his scent and leave no footprints. Whenever he stopped to rest, he could hear the bark of the hunting dogs in the distance. At night, he would climb to the top of a tall tree to check his direction by the constellations in the sky. When he did, he saw the flicker of campfires in the valleys above him. The whole town, the whole town guard, and probably most of the hunters were chasing him. Didrik's father, Caspar, must have put a huge bounty on his head. Now, on the third night, he could only see tiny pinpricks of light halfway up the mountain. They had turned back. The trail had gone cold. He breathed a sigh of relief and began the long climb down, careful not to lose his footing. Any injury, even a sprained ankle, could mean death now. He did not let himself become too complacent. Lord Faversham, one of the most powerful nobles in Hominum, owned most of the land around the base of Beartooth. He was notorious for sending patrols of his men through the forest to catch poachers. Fletcher would have trouble explaining to them why he was traveling alone, so far away from the safe mountain paths. The demon hissed with displeasure at being disturbed when he dropped to the ground. It had stayed in its customary position around his neck since he left the village. Fletcher was glad that it had. He had been cold and wet through for far too long, but the furnace in the demon's belly kept his neck and shoulders warm at least. Fletcher looked around, then decided that the base of the oak tree was a good place as any to camp. The ground was flat and covered in springy moss. The tree's canopy would keep off the worst of any rain, and although it was too late to build a shelter, there were plenty of dead branches laying around for a small fire. He stacked a small pile of kindling together, then used a flint and the steel of his blade to spark the tinder. "You couldn't spare us some of that fire now, could you?" Fletcher asked the demon, as the damp leaves he was using spluttered against the sparks. The demon unraveled at the sound of his voice, slinking down his arm to the ground. It yawned at him and looked at him with curiosity, cocking its head to the side like a confused puppy. "Come on now, there's got to be a way we can communicate somehow," Fletcher said, curling his fingers under the demon's chin and scratching it. The demon chirped and rubbed his hand with the side of its head. With each rub, Fletcher could feel a hint of a deep satisfaction on the edge of his consciousness, like an itch being scratched. "Fire!" Fletcher announced, pointing at the woodpile. The demon yapped and whirled in a circle. "Shh!" Fletcher hushed, a flash of fear running through him. The lower mountains were notorious for wolves. He had already heard the howls in the distance. They had been lucky so far to avoid them. The demon silenced and cowered, crawling between his legs. Had it understood? Fletcher sat cross-legged in the damp, wincing as the back of his pants became wet. He closed his eyes and racked his brains, trying to remember if Rotherham had mentioned anything in his stories about how summoners controlled their demons. As he did so, he sensed the consciousness of the demon, just as confused, scared, and alone as himself. He sensed a wave of comfort and felt the demon stiffen, then relax, the fear and loneliness replaced by simple tiredness and hunger. Then it clicked. That was how. It didn't understand his words. It sensed his emotions. He sensed the demon. He sent the demon a feeling of coldness, but the demon simply shrilled in discomfort and wrapped itself around his leg. Given how warm its body felt, Fletcher suspected it was not very familiar with any temperature other than one of warmth. Perhaps an image? He pictured fire, bringing back memories of the hot furnace in Burden's forge. The demon chirruped and blinked its round amber eyes at him. Perhaps fire reminded the little creature of home. Fletcher rubbed his numbed hands together in frustration. This was going to be harder than he'd thought. He slumped and put his threadbare jacket closer around his shoulders. If I'd managed to buy that jacket at the market, we wouldn't even need a fire, Fletcher grumbled. He stared at the wood pile, willing it to burst into flame. Without warning, a gout of fire shot from between his legs, flaring the dank wood into a crackling blaze. You clever little thing, Fletcher whooped, gathering the imp up in his arms and hugging it close to his chest. Already, he could feel the warmth seeping back into his frozen limbs. He smiled as the mellow glow brought back fond memories of Burden's forge. That reminds me, Fletcher said, dropping the demon into his lap and rummaging through the satchel. With the constant pursuit, he'd almost forgotten the gifts Burden had given him. He took the larger of the packages out and tore into it, his hands still clumsy from the cold. It was a bow, lacquered with clear varnish and strung with a fine braid of conditioned rawhide. The wood was intricately carved, the two ends curving in and then outward at the ends for extra power when bent back. The wood was yew, an expensive timber that Burden must have purchased from a trader the year before. It didn't grow on the mountains. He had treated and dyed it so that the usually pale bow had become gray, preventing it from catching the eye when the hunter crouched in the shadows. It was a beautiful, valuable weapon, the kind a master hunter would pay through the nose to own. Fletcher smiled and looked up at the top of Beartooth, giving silent thanks to Burden. It must have taken him months to make, working on it in secret when Fletcher was out hunting. There was even a slim quiver of fine goose feather arrows. He might be able to catch a mountain hare in the morning. With that thought, Fletcher's stomach rumbled. He put aside the second gift and delved into the bottom of his rucksack, taking out a weighty packet wrapped in brown paper. He opened this one with more care and smiled as he saw the jerky from the elk that Didrik tried to blackmail from him. He put a few strips on the fire to heat it up, then passed another to the demon. It gave it a wary sniff, then jerked its head forward and snapped at it, lifting its head upward and gulping it down whole like a hawk. Almost took my fingers off there, Fletcher observed, as the smell of cooking venison wafted under his nose. He reached into the bag again to see what other food was in there. He felt something that jingled and pulled out a heavy purse. Oh, Burden, you didn't, Fletcher murmured in wonder. But he had. From what Fletcher could see, it was over 1,000 shillings, almost a year's wage for Burden. Even knowing that his business would soon be under threat, the man had given Fletcher a good chunk of his savings. Fletcher almost wished he could go back and return it. Then remembered the 300 shillings he had saved up for the jacket was still sitting in his room. Hopefully Burden would find it, and the rest of Fletcher's old possessions would likely fetch some money as well. What else have you given me? Fletcher whispered. He picked up the second gift and shook it, feeling something soft and light. There was a note pinned to it. Fletcher tore off and read by the flickering firelight. Fletcher, we've always known the day we call our birthday is likely not the day you were born. Yet, to me, it will always be the most important day of my life. It is the day I became a father, and you became my son. Tonight, we shall go for a drink together and discuss the future of the business. I'm going to make you a full partner. Heaven knows you deserve it. This gift is just a small token of my appreciation for everything you've done for me over the years. I'm so proud of you. Happy birthday, son. Burden. Tears dripped onto the letter as Fletcher folded it, his heart full of longing for home. He opened the gift and sobbed as he saw the jacket he had wanted, burying his hands in the soft inner lining. Sorry, I'm tearing up too. You are a better father to me than my true father could ever have been, Fletcher whispered, looking up at the mountains. Somehow, the words he had left unsaid over the years were what he regretted the most. The demon began to mewl at Fletcher's misery, licking his fingers in sympathy. Fletcher patted his head and shuffled closer to the fire, allowing himself a few minutes of sadness. Then he wiped tears from his eyes, put on the jacket, and pulled the hood over his head, his heart filled with resolve. He was going to make a new life, one that Burton would be proud of. He was going to make it to Corsalum. And that's all for chapter 13. Have a good night, my boy. I love you.